Good morning, dear friends. Welcome. Thank you for joining our daily Talmud Chabura, studying the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. We are presently studying Pesachim Shabbos, Pesachim, chapter 1. It takes some time to change those neural pathways. Pesachim Gimel Amud Beis. Today is Chaf Beis Adar, the 22nd of Adar, 5783. Is it the 15th? Yes, it is March 15th, 2023. And we are talking all about the power, the value of positive, delicate, uplifted speech. The Mishnah, the Gemara chooses to use the word or, which is so much more refined than Laila, or even though it means night, conveys themes of light and positivity and optimism. But from there, we transitioned fast to areas where the contrast between the two word choices are a whole lot more stark. Tameh, or Eino Tehora, pure, and Tameh, which again, English doesn't give us a good word to convey the intensity of the word Tameh. Then we talked about the delicate, or I should say the nuanced choice of describing the manner that someone is riding upon an animal. If the description is rochev or rochevet, which is riding, or yoshev, sitting. And I want to point out, or we're going to see soon, there is actually additional dialogue in the commentaries. If the issue is the speech or the behavior or both, and the Gemara that we read that's probing different scenarios where the Chumash or the Tanakh describe a woman as being rochev and why those scenarios are acceptable, and that's where we're going to pick up. And in each scenario, the Gemara says, hey, you're saying that the Torah doesn't use the language of rochev. Well, here's an instance where there's rochev. And then the Gemara's answer is, yeah, but that's a unique situation where it's actually necessary to ride, unlike the manner that someone shared yesterday, I don't recall who, that they might be sitting on a side saddle. But there are scenarios where you need to be extra grounded and secure, and therefore you might have to sit and ride in a more conventional manner. So is that saying that the behavior is regulated or the description is regulated? So let's jump into the Gemara. But first, I want to dedicate today's learning for the well-being of the members of our Chabura, of course, and a special added tefillah for the well-being, the safety and security of the residents of Israel, whatever the headlines are, safety, security, stability. And I just wanted to throw in added notes that on Shabbos, this Shabbos in the second minyan, we had with us a young man who is presently in the military. I don't remember the name of the division or unit, but he signed up for one of these elite paratrooper urban warfare units. And he actually had to, usually, I guess, he's a Chayal Boded, meaning his family's in America. And usually American Chayalim can volunteer for a shortened term. But here, in order to join this unit, he had to agree, I think, to a longer term. I don't know if it was instead of 5 years instead of 3 years. And so it was with great nachas and kavod that we were able to have him in shul and give him an aliyah. And
Rabbi,
yes,
there's a few of them around. I ran into a family at Hummus Achila on Monday night, and the young boy also with his father is serving in Israel. I was with Elkabatz, and he told me he's in a very high unit from what he could appreciate. So Hashem should protect them all.
Baruch Hashem, I'm South Florida, like Montreal, like Bergen County, I suspect, and a few other places are strongly pro-Israel and supportive. And we have, as I say in Shul, a large number of past, present, and future people in the Tzahal. And Baruch Hashem, Florida has a large population of Israeli expats whose kids choose to go back, and American-born, and many generations of not living in Israel, and yet the connection to Israel is so strong, Baruch Hashem. And but I was just noting, as we pray and dedicate our shir for the well-being of the residents and the Chayalim, so I wanted to just note that we actually had someone on furlough it was a very short window of time. I was very impressed. He comes from a traditional home, but they work them really, really rigorously. And I think that they intentionally do not allow them to have more than a very small number of hours of consecutive sleep to condition their body to always be on high alert. And it's a more intense than the average. And so I said, listen, you have 1 week of vacation and you come to shul. I told him it's very impressive. He said, listen, Rabbi, the fact that for me, davening, coming to Shacharis at 10 o'clock, that's practically, that's a real vacation because 7 o'clock, I'm already after Shacharis in the army. And so, anyways, that was what he told me. All right, let's share the screen. Let's jump in. Let's do some learning. Ezrat Hashem. Oh, I'm assuming the 201 is Dr. Hammer. It was good to see you last night, and thank you for the picture.
Yes. I'm having trouble with my computer. I'm on my computer, but it's not turning on properly. So I went on the phone. So
well,
I'm here.
Well, good to have you on.
I survived yeshiva night. Thank you.
You survived. Well, you didn't volunteer to be cut in half by our magician, so you survived.
Fascinating combination of food, entertainment, and some words of Torah.
Some Torah in between. Where else could you get that all?
That's true.
All right, so into the Gemara. We've been talking again, as I said in the introduction, about delicate and refined language, and we went through a process, or versus Lila, and then we talked about Tahora and Eno Tahora, which is more words, and we looked at Rashi, and this Rashi is going to become important, where Rashi says that the Torah chose one scenario, where even though it's embracing a lengthier language, to tell us that in general, when all things are equal, we always want to choose positive language. And we quoted a brisa that talks about Merkav versus Moishav, riding versus sitting. And then the Gemara goes through a series of different verses that do describe a woman as riding. Rivka, for example, was tirkavna ala gemalim. Why was she riding on a camel in a roichev kind of way? Which apparently the word rechiva, riding, is synonymous with having one's legs slung on both sides of the animal, which in the culture and the time of the Tanakh, and even much more recently, was considered unrefined and was opposite of the expectation or the standard that women held themselves to. Again, I don't know what to make of it in modern times, but let's understand that was the culture and that was the position. So the Gemara asks, hold on, Moshe Rabbeinu also rode. Moshe's wife also was riding on a camel, on a donkey. So once again, the Gemara answers, we're describing Moshe going with his wife and his children. And so the language could be describing more the children, and so maybe Yocheved, not Yocheved, maybe Tzipora was riding on a side saddle. We wouldn't know. We don't know from this text. Let's read one more line, and then I want to take a look fast at the Ben Yoyada just because he makes the point that I was trying.
When Lavan came to Yaakov, that Rachel was sitting on a
What's
camel.
the language over there? Do you remember?
Remember, because she was hiding the trophy in the.
But the question is, what's the language?
I'll Google it.
No, that's early, not 20. Okay, this is one where I still need to figure out how to navigate Safari. Oh, here.
It wouldn't be. Not Pesach. It's the one before Vayeshev.
Here we go. Oh no, it's like 30. What is it? 32, 31.
No.
I'm almost there. Here we go. Rachel lochas atrafim. Atasimaim bikar gamal. Rachel took the trofim, the idols, placed them in his camel cushion, sat on them. Ateshav alehem. So Mark, this language. Well, first of all, she wasn't sitting on the camel; she was sitting on the cushion.
That's true. Yeah,
but also the language that it uses is vateshev. And so now we understand why this is not quoted, because it doesn't really inform our conversation substantively one way or another.
We don't know whether the cushion was on a camel at the time or not.
It wasn't on a camel. It's in her tent. I mean, that's how I understand it, maybe, right? I don't imagine they had the camels in the tents. I may be wrong. One more line. The Torah tells us a story about David HaMelech when he was on the run, and there's a mean man, who was very rude. And although David HaMelech requests support, he rejects David HaMelech's request, and he is very mean and rude. And he becomes the subject of David HaMelech's anger. Let's look very fast at the pasuk here. Naval was his name. We actually encountered Abigail, the wife of Naval, who becomes eventually David HaMelech's wife, in a bit. So Shmuel dies, the people gather around him, they bury Shmuel, and then David moves on. There was a wealthy man, very wealthy, lots of cattle and sheep, and he was going to shear his sheep. The wife of Naval was called Abigail. She was a very good, wise, kind, delicate person. Her husband, man, bad, coarse, gruff. And David HaMelech hears that Naval is shearing his sheep. And so David HaMelech sends a bunch of men. I believe he's on the run from Shaul. And he says, please reach out to Naval and attempt to create an alliance and ask for support. And Naval rejects David very strongly, calling him a runaway slave. You want to just drain my resources. And they come back to David. David's upset. And they're gonna take on this group for being what's the word? Practically declaring an insurrection against King David. Again, King David was still securing his monarchy, but that's the most vulnerable time, and so therefore it seems like there was an inclination to be very, very forceful with them, which again is not really the subject of our discussion. The subject of our discussion.
I don't think he was a king at that time.
He was anointed as king by Shmuel.
Nobody knew about that.
He wasn't beginning. It seems like he was in the beginning of building his. We'll have to go back but the point is that there's two choices. Either David HaMelech is his own king, and again, this is maybe my lack of recall of the exact chronology, or he was a representative of Shaul's monarchy. Either way, the response of Naval was not appropriate, at least to David and his people. And so there's going to be a conflict. They're going to enforce this respect. So Abigail, Eishes Naval Higid Nar Echad Ben Arm Lemar. David HaMelech tried to reach out and make an overture to your household, and your master kicked at them, scorned them, and they were nice to us. They didn't do anything shameful. They didn't harm us, take anything. They were actually protecting. Actually, I remember Dr. Stamler referenced that this felt like a mob racket. I remember that. Do you remember that, Rabbi Menachem?
No, it was me who said that.
Oh, it was the professor. Okay, I'm sorry.
Remember, yeah.
Okay, I remember what. Okay.
I still think so.
Yeah. So they were protecting us. And so consider carefully what you should do, for harm threatens our master and all his household. He didn't accept our protection, and he was nasty. So Abigail rushes and collects a number of items, food items, high value items, and I guess they're laden with stuff. And here's the verse, and here's really the whole point of our conversation. The Haya Ki roicheves ala chamor. Abigail, who was described in the Tanakh's perspective as a refined, dignified, wonderful person. And what is she doing? She's being roicheves ala chamor. V'yeredes b'seiser ahar, and she's coming down the steep incline of the mountain. Dr. Stamler, do you like my translation or the Sepharia translation better? Vihine, anyway, she's riding down the trail, and David and his people are approaching her, and they meet up. And what happens,
Rabbi,
happens. In the
I
end,
don't- Rabbi,
Well,
I
I'll
don't
tell you one
remember
thing.
the source.
One thing I
Uh,
would say is here, maybe she was rochevet. She had to ride not in a dignified way because it's down the side of a mountain, which is a
Gemara is
little
going to
more
address
difficult.
exactly why she might have been riding in a more conventional way and not in the feminized Victorian side saddle or whatever.
in one of the sources, I don't know which ones, I remember reading that she was riding, and when she was dismounting from the donkey, because she was riding in the shape, she revealed more of her legs and lower body than it was usually accepted, and this is what had David smitten.
You're saying it worked out well for her in the end. What?
Yes, it worked well, but because of her riding position, she was able to reveal
I hear.
more
Okay.
than
Yeah.
modest women usually do.
Interesting. Yeah, that sounds possibly, again, I have to refresh, but that's the essence of the idea. So let's see the Gemara's analysis. And again, if we're talking about a person at the I just want to remind you one more time, the reason why we had discussed her previously is because we discussed in a previous Gemara in Masechah Shabbos, when we're talking about life and afterlife and the purpose of life, if you recall, we talked about how she praises David and says that his soul, even after his lifetime, will be bound in the Tzurura B'tzur HaChaim, and we use that as a factual statement describing the state of souls after 120. And the question we asked was, so what? Why are we giving her so much credit and credence? And so the first answer was, well, if the Tanakh chooses to report it, obviously it's accurate. But additionally, she is noted to have been one of the prophets or prophetesses of the Jewish tradition, and a very great woman, and also eventually David HaMelech's spouse. And so the point again is she's considered a model, a dignified person, and so we are going to read deeply into her mannerisms and behavior. So let's understand. She was being roichev. So the Ben Yehoyada is going to help clarify this, but the question is, the Torah uses a language that describes her as riding. She's driving at night, and when you ride at night, the road is a whole lot less predictable, and so you want to be in the most stable, strong position. And therefore, it is common, even though a woman, if they're riding around in a luxurious, unpressured manner, they might ride on a side saddle. When you're riding at night, you need to be extra secure and confident. You need to ride in a more conventional manner. An alternate explanation. Mishum Be'isusa Delilah Leka. Maybe there is no excuse that she's afraid. Mishum Be'isusa the David Ika. But remember, she's on a mission to protect herself and her household from the wrath of David. Or alternatively, so either she's afraid of David's, what he's going to do, or she's intimidated about meeting royalty. Whether David HaMelech again is a general or a king or the son-in-law of the king, every part of his career, he would have been an intimidating person to encounter. And so therefore, she's in a more scared state. And therefore, she's riding in a more secure position. Alternatively, she's not afraid of David, or at the very least, the kind of fear that you have of a scary person is not the kind of fear that you're afraid of falling off the donkey. So how is that an excuse? But she's driving on a slope, on an incline, and therefore you really want to hold on for dear life. You want to hold on tight. Let's see how Rabbi Steinsaltz translates the fear of David. He doesn't. So this is the explanation of why Abigail is riding on a donkey in the conventional male type manner, not on a side saddle or in some more feminine way. Let's look at the Ben Yehoyada for a second because he goes through some of the questions that I was wondering. So he quotes the Gemara that quotes the story of Rivka, and the reason why she rode on a camel is because camels are very scary and you need to sit tight. Is the Gemara's question, are women allowed to ride on a donkey? The objective of our Gemara is not to describe women riding, it's to describe the acceptable manner of describing. This is a literary question. This is a question about modesty in language, not in fact. So how do we answer the question of how could the Torah say that they were roche by saying, yeah, she was afraid? Okay, that would only justify what she was doing, but not the Torah's choice to describe. So although she is indeed riding on a camel, we should still use a euphemistic language that is more delicate and modest. Describe the same facts, the set of facts, but in a more delicate, euphemistic, remez kind of way. That's a good question. That was my question. So the truth of the matter is the initial brisa was really only discussing language. But we learn from here that although there's no prohibition to ride in that manner, the verse is informing us of the common practice. So we're not making we're not censoring and saying you're not allowed to ride in that manner, because you are allowed to ride in that manner. But we're choosing a more delicate language because that's also the actual practice. Bilti pislik reglaim, to avoid having the legs slung on both sides of the animal. And here is where I use the word Victorian. As is the custom of the women in Europe. They instruct the women to ride on a side saddle. Bilti pisuk reglaim, without. Doctor, you're saying something?
No.
Without a side, on a side saddle. So it's very interesting. The Ben Yehoyada, the Ben Ish Chai lived in Iraq, and then in Israel, and in that region where they probably would have encountered British Europeans. And this is in exactly the time that we might call the Victorian era. And so it's very interesting that he describes being aware of the way folks were educated in his day. And so that is an interesting thing. We can infer that from the Brisa of Rabbi Shmuel. If it is not prevalent and common for women to ride that way, if we're going to avoid describing it, for sure the actual practice is even worse, because the linguistic, literary suggestion is not going to be worse than the actual practice. That's how we understand. And now we understand why the explanation is the fear. In honesty, it would have been ideal to use a more refined language. So why don't we? A more descriptive language. Basically, the verse is describing the way she rides as the conventional male, masculine riding, legs slung on both sides of the animal, to teach us that there is a heter when the riding is fraught with danger or risky. Being that we know that it's not the common way to ride, therefore the Torah is going to underscore when it's acceptable to teach us not only about literary ideals, but also about behavior. In our region in Arabia, that's probably not exactly the precise language, but in our region, Kivan de ein derech nashim lerkav bishul til kanashim. today, our women in the Islamic countries don't go for joy rides. They only ride with purpose. Alkein loy nislam du hanoshim ben Yisraelim ben nachrim minig are Europa sheroichem min atzad bli pisak reglaim shezenik ramash alaroichem pisak reglaim. And so, being that we only ride in the Arabic countries with intention, therefore we ride with our legs over both sides of the animal. So that's interesting because we many times in today's society we associate modesty and what's the word? There's probably a better word. This sense of more of the Islamic nations, but in this regards, in the 1700s, the Ben Yehoyada himself, the Ben Ish Chai himself, is attesting that the Europeans were more modest than the way the folks of the Islamic countries were. Alan, your hand.
I just wanted to add something to it, that riding a donkey or a horse or a camel is all the same. It's just a matter of getting used to the height. And the camels, people got confused with the hump on the camel, so that what they used to do is put cushions that raise the seat of the camel right
Is
up
it
to the
possible
hump.
that a camel going down and up would be a much
That's the only problem.
okay?
I rode a camel and I almost killed myself.
And hold on, let me ask you another question. Is it possible that the movement, even during the movement of the camel while it's walking, might also have a broader range of go up and down?
I guess in the desert, it's a different story because the sand is sometimes loose and sometimes
Right.
thick. So, the camel can weigh from one side to another.
So that might explain the
But,
camel waiver, the heter to ride a camel in a conventional manner.
That's right.
All right. So I think with this, we've concluded our discussion about riding and ideal manners. The point we've made is that the Torah, when all things are equal, will choose a more delicate, obscure language. However, the Gemara is willing to the Torah is willing to be more explicit when it's necessary for instruction to understand etiquette and the limits of etiquette. Meaning the Torah also says there are certain ideal manners and etiquette in certain areas, but we're not going to ask you to kill yourself and fall off a mountain or to fall off a camel, or when you're very anxious, of course you're expected to do what's safe. Safety first, I think we say. And that seems to be the lesson of this Gemara, notwithstanding a high expectation of modesty, let's say. Now the Gemara is going to ask another good question. Are you telling me that the Torah does not wield the word tamei because it's indelicate, because it's crass, because it's brash, and it's very descriptive? Well, we know that the Torah is full of the word tamei. So what's going on over here? Ella, now let's qualify Rabbi Yishmael's statement that he says that the Torah is willing to choose tahar, eneno tahora over tamei. Kol heicha. When there are two words with equal length and we need to decide between one and the other, then the Torah is always going to default to the dignified, euphemistic, refined expression. But when to do that, you're going to have to add extra words. The Torah will prioritize shorthand. The Torah will prioritize a concise expression. And so we now know the Torah has two values, competing values, when choosing how to express itself. On one hand, we consider refined speech, but on the other hand, and apparently even a higher priority would be concise, precise, shortened language. It is even more or equally important to teach a student concise language. Why? Excuse me. Because the student will have an easier time recalling, and there's less room for confusion. When one speaks in a meandering way, there's more of a chance that the point might be missed. But if you make it in a very clear and concise way, and this is especially true about a time when everything was being committed to memory versus transcribing. Rashi d'chi adadininu she'ein oyrach b'loshen sach min hameguna mishtoi b'loshen kavod. When there's no more length in the refined, from the crass, the verse will talk in a dignified manner, in a covered manner, but the Torah is not going to sacrifice being concise just to have a refined language, which is an interesting conflict of values with an interesting solution or resolution. All right, there we have it. Let's continue. The Gemara says, 1 second, let's really think this through. Are you sure that the Torah will always default to the more dignified, refined language if all things are equal? We have an instance where that's not so. Roy cheves, v'yoysheves, the 2 words, rochevet, writing, and yoshevet, sitting. The chiadadi nino, they have the precise same number of letters, 5 and 5. The ka'ama rocheves, and yet we read that Abigail was being rocheves, she was writing. So the Gemara says, hold on a second. You're missing something. The word rocheves can be spelled with a cholam, with a pintala, and it can be spelled with a vav. And the ksiv, the way the verse is written, and actually here I'm opening the verse itself so we can see in real time, the haya he rocheves. Does anyone see a vav in this word rocheves that I'm circling? How many letters are in that word?
4. 4.
4. And so the reason why the Torah chooses rocheves here, says the Gemara, is because it's shorter. Rocheves ksiv. Let's read Rashi, and I think I know your next question. So just give us a second. Let's see Rashi, and then I think we share a question, whoever that was. In Parshas Noach, we chose one area where we'll speak a longer sentence to teach us that we always prioritize when all things are equal, refined language. But in the rest of the Bible, we are willing to use the more crass language if the kotzer, that's short, to teach us that you should always use concise language. The shorter the teaching, the shorter the expression, the greater the precision, and the easier and more likely it'll be remembered. So now Rashi is going to answer a question that I had, and I suspect some of you had. If we're willing to write the word recheves without a vav, surely you can also write the word yoisheves without a vav. Mihu kol chasera shebetorah lidrosh hein boyin. Bekan limedcha b'chisarin zeh shetzvitvos loshen kitzara. The Torah does not omit a letter to write it b'loshen kitzara unless it's coming to teach us an additional detail, halacha, or fact. And here the Torah chose to slice off that vav, to write recheves, to teach us the value of a concise language. Afilu hu meguna. And so here, this citation is with the intention of teaching us the value of short language versus refined language. Now I'm going to ask everyone to look very carefully. Alan, can I share the picture you sent me? My phone will cooperate, which I don't know if it is. I want you to look very, very carefully on the WhatsApp. I'm going to pull this onto the screen if I can. Bear with me just a moment. It's very important. Alan, do you agree with me? This is very important.
Sure.
All right, hang on a second. Meanwhile, as my WhatsApp loads, here we go. Please draw your attention to the screen. You'll note a an actor, a movie star, riding on a camel, but you're actually riding at the high point of the camel. This is a single humped camel, and you're riding right on top of it. True or false?
It's because he was in business class.
Alan, can you please explain this to us?
I was riding on it's a saddle.
The saddle, and the saddle is at the high point of the camel.
That's right. Yeah. And it's terrifying.
It's terrifying. And you could imagine that the climb down and the way those legs move, you could have a very bumpy ride.
The camel was sitting down when I got on it, and I didn't know, the guy didn't explain anything to me. It was the first time I was on a camel, and I was sitting straight up, and his back legs went up, and I went flying. I almost hit him in the head. I almost hit the camel in the head. And then I finally straightened out, and then he put his front legs up, so I almost fell backwards.
And that's why you have those little extensions in the front and back.
I was terrified.
And did it spit at all, the camel?
No.
And this is the
he was just holding the rope so the camel wouldn't run away.
This looks like Petra.
It is.
Very nice. Alan, thank you for sharing.
I just sent you something from YouTube that I saw a while ago, also with a camel.
Let's see, Reb Menachem. This is, hold on, I don't know if you can hear the sound because I don't know if I have my, this is very, very important, obviously.
Percent in a matter of weeks can be found in your kitchen. Are you afraid?
Dr. Hammer, this is instead of going on a field trip as you suggested, we're going to suffice with this.
I'm sorry, I'm missing it.
Oh, you can't see it. I'm sorry. We'll send you this.
Yes,
This is an image of a camel that's not agreeing to stand up until. Oh,
you see what happens?
Oh yeah.
Rabbi, is this part of the discussion on Tsar Balachayim?
If it isn't, it should be. Oh, yeah.
I think they have to be paid for this experience.
I was going to say, there's definitely a lawsuit somewhere.
You're all laughing, but it's terrifying.
We're laughing, but that must have been terrifying. So if you're wondering what Alan had to go through to get up here, Reb Menachem sent us the ever important clip. So I want to thank you both for, and Dr. Hammer suggested yesterday that we should go to a zoo or to Israel, which we should still do. But until then, I think we were Yotze. All right, let's see a few anecdotes, important anecdotes on the value of delicate, appropriate language and the high standard of expectations in the sages.
He'll play bridge today.
You think they had travel insurance? Does travel insurance cover that? Reb Menachem, they may have needed a dentist too. All right. Hano, Trey, Talmidei, two students. The Rab, who were in the presence of Rav. Chadomar, one commented, Shavi Sinon Haishmaita. This teaching has left us. Kadover acher misankon. It has made us tired like a dover acher. Who knows what a dover acher is? A dover acher is a reference to a chazir, a pig. Saying this teaching, this shir was so rigorous, it's left us as tired as a pig. Chadomar, the other students, chimes in and says, Shavasinan haishmaita, this teaching has made us Kigdim is Sankon as tired as a goat. Rav would not speak to the first guy. Rav gave the first student to one, he said he feels like a pig, the silent treatment. How long was the silent treatment? I don't know. According to Rabbi Steinsaltz's translation, Rab would not speak with a student who made the reference to the pig, as one who speaks inappropriately is undoubtedly flawed in character. So it sounds like he was not in the honor roll among the students. Let's read Rashi. Higdi misan kon. Higdi oyef, tired like a goat. Sinuk, the word sinuk is lashon ayefos, means fatigue. V'doy maloi god higdi v'sinak loy. The Gemara, the Shabbos Perek b'Meisha, his gaber ma'azoli v'alti oyef. So we find that the word misankon is tiredness. So we see that Rav was makpid, that his students should speak in a refined manner. Now let's look briefly at the Chassam Sofer. Let's see. Okay, interesting. Here in the Chassam Sofer, it's beyond my ability to do a real-time translation, but he is essentially justifying and saying that in truth, the student who said he was tired like a pig, he meant something of substance and significance. And he says there are differences between the manner and the behavior of a goat and a pig, and he probably intended the student did mean something specific. But anyways, so there, in case you're wondering if there is a defense to the student who said he feels like a pig. Now, note something else. You notice how the Gemara describes a pig. He doesn't say chazir. He says davar acher. Davar acher means another thing or something else. The thing that can't be mentioned. So it's interesting to note that the way the Gemara shares the story is euphemistically. So what do you think the student said? Did the student say, I feel like a chazer? And the Gemara censored his language? Or did he himself use a euphemistic language, trying to be refined, and yet still didn't make the cut because he even made a indirect reference to the pig? So let's see. The Rabbeinu Chanano, give me a second. Yeah. Okay, I'm not sure, but it seems like he actually used the language of davar acher, and yet he got in trouble. All right, let's see another story or two. Hanu Trey Talmidi Rabbi Yasvik Hamid Hillel. There were two students in the presence of Hillel. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and one of them was the great and famous Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. V'amri lo kamei de Rebbe, or the same tradition was also possibly said, or meaning the story could have happened in the presence of Rebbe. Rabbi Yochanan, and Rebbe had a student called Rabbi Yochanan. One student says, hey guys, what is the reason? He asked the question. Why is it that bitzira, grapes, must be harvested bitara, but masika or moiskin, but harvesting olives isn't bitara? Again, why are we in particular to harvest grapes with tahar kalim, but we don't have the same hakpada? We aren't as particular, the ein moiskin bitara. We don't insist on purity when we collect olives. That's how one of the students expressed the question. The other student said, Why is it that when it comes to grapes, it's betara or moiskin, bituma, but when we collect and harvest olives, it is bituma? Two students, same idea, but they express themselves differently. Amar, Rebbe, or Hillel commented, Muftach ani bozeh, I'm confident on the one who said, Ein moiskin betara, shemoiro hayrabi Yisrael, he's going to become a great Jewish leader. And it didn't take long. At shehayra hayrabi Yisrael, indeed, Rabbi Yochanan, actually both Rabbi Yochanans became very great leaders in the people of Israel. Let's read Rashi. Why are we particular to use pure vessels for collecting the olives? The same description of harvest has a separate language for olives. It is not necessary to be tahar when you do that. The liquid that flows out of the olives when you're harvesting them is not considered sufficient to cause the olives to become susceptible to ritual impurity. Because that which flows out of the olive at that point is not oil. It needs to be under the pressure of the press. Basically, the byproduct of grapes is always grape juice. The byproduct of olives, there's other fluids that can flow out that are not considered valuable and desirable as olive oil. And so two rabbis, two students, both great, both accurate, but the one who used language to be medakta, to only use dignified language, he wouldn't say tuma, he said ein moiskim betara, he became a great leader in the Jewish people. And now the question becomes, it's interesting, because didn't we say that the Torah prioritizes being brief over the language? And ein moiskim betara, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 or 9 letters. And tuma here is 1, 2, 3, 6 letters. Excuse me. And so maybe the second student was better. And so the Ben Yehuda asked this question among others. Look at this. Why did he praise the student who used a more delicate language? The second student should have been praised. He followed the instruction of our Gemara a few seconds ago. You should always use shorthand. You should always be as concise as possible. When a teacher is teaching a student, he should use short language. When a student is inquiring of his teacher, then he should always use this dignified language. A teacher can deal with a lot more words and distractions, and he will understand what's going on. The Prush of Hiller be interesting. Basically, he was very subtly telegraphing to his teacher that he knows that his teacher could have put up with his meandering, lengthy language.
Rabbi,
interesting. Yes.
Are we not left with the question of what's the priority, less letters or refined language?
So what the Ben Yehuda explained is that our Gemara is making the case that a teacher would always prioritize short language even over refined language. But a student should always try to speak in a refined, delicate manner, because that's more respectful to the teacher. Because the fact that you're speaking more words to say the same thing in reasonable conversation. We're not saying to specifically be long-winded, we're saying that in this presentation of a question, if you have two choices, you could use the lengthier, more refined language because the teacher could deal with it.
But I mean, in general, what are we to learn from this?
Explain. Tell me more.
No, if we're supposed to learn from this, if I'm in a situation where I have a choice, not in the presence of a teacher, do I choose refined language or do I try to figure out what's the shortest?
I think generally we should probably use refined language, with the exception of a teacher who needs to be absolutely precise. Interestingly enough, here in this work, the Pesachim Ch1, he quotes that there is a version of the Talmud that actually flips the script and says that he praised the student who spoke more concisely. So interesting. This is a fascinating and important conversation.
Rabbi, a teacher has to use the most simple language as possible.
Yes, that's what we're
because
saying.
He's got to get through to all the students.
Indeed.
If he uses all these refined, large, big words,
Yes.
the students will just sit there in awe.
Yes. Awe is not the objective of a teacher. Instruction, education, and knowledge is the objective of the teacher. Very interesting.
From my teaching experience, I came to the conclusion that concise language is not as effective because not all necessary details come through. So in many situations, it's more effective to beat the dead horse with longer languages, returning to the point that has already been made, and so on, to make sure that the thing being discussed is really gets into the students' minds.
Professor, let me ask you a question. Let's say, and again, I so don't know anything about your field, so I hope I'm not going to. But let's say you need to convey a certain axiom or truth or fact or technique. So would it not be true that you'd want to first on the whiteboard, on the convey a brief description of that practice, value, ideal, axiom, and then take all the time that you need to elaborate and explain and be sure the students understand it? But if you're teaching a certain principle, surely the more concise that principle is, the greater ease the students will have to retain that one line and then attach to it all of the additional explanation that you're giving afterwards. Would that be
What you
so?
are describing sounds like a sound teaching practice. However, here we are trying to compare two methods, just a brief line or just a longer explanation.
Right.
In your example, you combine those two methods. You first make concise introduction, and then you explain what that means and what the details are and what limitations of this or whatever there is to be explained with the long language. That's a different proposition.
I believe, and I may be wrong, I'm willing to be wrong, but my impression is that this actually might be what's going on over here, because we're talking about teaching a concise halacha, which is like on Shabbos, whatever, or, and then the elaboration. I may be wrong. You're right. It could be that we're saying in general to be short, but a teacher wants to make sure that the students understand. But that would be my default, reaction, is that maybe, and understanding a little more about the way the tradition worked, you had the core teachings, you had the Mishnahs or the statements that needed to be really deeply ingrained, and then you had the what would you call it? You have the abstract, and then you have the full. So you want the abstract to be abstract.
Yeah. All right. Just 2 cents.
Thank you for bringing it down into the classroom. It's helpful. But this story, I mean, we're going to move on, but this story needs a lot of exploration, because it really it leaves us in an interesting place. It leaves us with conflicting values. The teacher needs to go short and precise, but it needs more work. But anyways, another story. Hanu Tulasa Kahani. There were once 3 Kohanim, priests. Alan, you're listening carefully? Is Alan on?
Sure.
Okay. 3 Kohanes. Chad Omar Lahu. And they were talking about their what they got that day from the Rashi says Milechem Aponim Lechelki. They would divide up the showbread. And they were describing how much bread they got. And they are kvetching about the small size of their chelek. They got a little breadcrumb. So one Kohen says, "Oi, you know what? Higyani keful. I got a little bean-sized bread." Chad Omar Higyani kezayis. The other one says, and it sounds like they're describing the same amount, just with different descriptions. The other one says, "I got an olive size." Chad Omar, the third guy says, Higyani kiznav halita'ah. My lechem aponim is like the size of a lizard tail, which in Florida we can appreciate more than elsewhere.
The lizard tail thing was supposed to be not nice language.
The lizard tail is not nice language. We're talking because a lita'ah is a sheret. It's a ritually impure animal, and to be describing the lechem haponim, the show bread of the Beis Hamikdash in the holy, on the shulchan, which is again connected to our parsha. So someone heard this, and they sent it up the food chain, and they did an investigation. Batko achrav, and they investigated him. What did they investigate? We'll see soon. Umatsu boy shemetz pesul. They found something that disqualified him from actually being a kohen. Bear with me a moment. Vatanya, the Gemara says, hold on a second. Once a person is cleared for service in the Beis Hamikdash, we do not reopen the file. Because as we know, there was an investigative process. The kohen wanted to serve in the Beis Hamikdash. They had a whole file opened up, and they investigated their family heritage and their history, and they needed to prove with solid evidence that they have heritage from the priesthood. But there's a brisa that says that once a kohen is waved into the Beis Hamikdash, they do not reopen a file. Once a kohen has been in the Beis Hamikdash, there is no need to investigate because they would only allow him with a very, very rigorous investigation. So how can you reopen the file? So the Gemara answers, it's not that they found a disqualification in his heritage. His arrogance makes the Kohen administration reject him. Rashi, he was haughty. And acted disdainfully, treated the Kadshe Shamayim, the sanctified foods, in a disdainful way, and therefore he should not be permitted to, if he doesn't value being a Kohen, he should not be permitted to serve. A Kohen who rejects any facet of the temple rituals should not be enacting Kohen, should not serve in the Beis Hamikdash. And alternatively, Shani Hasam. Usually we do not open the file once it's closed. The Ara Nafshe over here, he himself raised with his behavior a red flag, and therefore they did reopen the file, even though that's not a common practice. So here we see how the way a person speaks tells us a lot about their conscious and subconscious relationship to the stuff they do and who they are. And so therefore this language was considered highly is highly criticized.
Rabbi, it sounds like a joke. Three Kohanim walk into a bar.
Yeah. Tosfos, by the way, says that maybe we're not challenging his heritage, but maybe we're challenging if he comes from a Kohen family that engaged in a practice that caused them to be disqualified, not because of their core heritage, but because of Avodah Zarah or other things that led the Kohanim to disallow them. Anyways, my dear friends, the punchline, the main point our Gemara has made in many different ways, with many different anecdotes, is the power of speech, the power of and the virtue of refined speech, and we also balanced it out with the value of precision and conveying accurate halacha. And so, although we always value refined speech, there are times where there might be a higher teaching value. And so this is a fascinating Gemara, and certainly if we're going to give a presentation on the Talmud's take on education, this Gemara would be featured in that discussion. And so this is an important Gemara. We haven't talked about Pesach yet. Tomorrow we're going to go back to an immediate Pesach discussion. My dear friends, thank you so much for joining today. Wishing good health and good news for the members of our Chabura. And we should only have good news out of Israel for the safety and security of.
Rabbi,
Yeah. Oh, Rebel, safe travels.
yes, Menachem, as to what you said, I just saw in Jay Post that Netanyahu is coming back earlier from Germany because
Yeah,
of the
yeah, this
security
was already
situation.
announced this morning. This was
Oh,
already announced
yeah.
this morning.
So
Must
he
be
wants to
quite
be the one to
serious.
announce it.
Something definitely happened and something is definitely going on.
Yeah.
But they didn't publicize it yet.
Must be serious if he cut a strip short.
Either
Well, he didn't-
serious or seriously politically
Rabbi, I think we
advantageous.
should stop,
Well,
stop
Pardon
the
me for
recording,
saying.
Rabbi. Rabbi,
He-
stop the recording.
Oh, whoops.